Hey everyone, Stiggy here, and welcome back to the city of Hunterville in City Skylines. In today's episode, I plan to build out a hospital complex in the city, but first off, we're doing some road network expansion for some of the inner-lying suburbs here. And here we're just extending along the area beside the rail line, which I reconfigured off camera to take a slightly different route. And this area is kind of tucked in between there and this little river here that runs through, and beside the park that we built in the last episode. And for this area I was just using a grid layout with some changes to follow the riverbank, and also made in this curved road here since it felt like it sort of worked a bit better with the way that the grid was. And here we're extending out a bit more alongside the river. This road doesn't take such a gridded approach as it follows the riverbank. And then coming through with some more grids, and there's an area to the bottom of the screen that I also did completely off camera, which I'll show in a live play later on. But here we're coming through with what I've devised as like 1920s style homes, which is like a mix of bungalows, some other houses, maybe like one or two Art Deco buildings per set, but not too many. And just coming through there and setting those down. This is still relatively close to the city, so using that time period of house design makes sense in this area. Like we slowly gradually transition from my set of like 1900s homes, which are like all sort of Edwardian and Victorian weatherboard homes, to whatever's in between there, some 1910s, which is a slightly different mix of houses, to this set which has all the bungalows, as I said before. And then we're going to move over to working on a 1930s style, which includes many more Art Deco in comparison to the total number of houses, and just some other styles and things. And then my grand vision is that from there the city would keep expanding. I would keep creating sets with like 50 different asset editor houses for each decade, and eventually that'd snowball out into like brand new suburbs built in today's time in 2025. But that is probably not very realistic to be achievable, as I was planning on having the city cover like 50 or 60 square kilometers, which is about 12 map tiles, or maybe even more than that. But anyway, here we're coming through, just adding a few trees along the river. I do like the vibe that it creates with those houses along the river there, and then you've got some nice sort of greenery there as a separation from the river and any flooding things that might be going on, potentially flood mitigation things. And here we're just coming through and adding in some of the 1930s style homes. If you're paying attention earlier in the time lapse, you'll notice that in contrast this section includes a lot more Art Deco homes, for example. And here's just a quick overview of some of the changes that we've made. Only some of it was shown off camera, but you can see that there's quite a bit of suburban expansion that I've done. So now we're hopped in game real quick, and this is the area we were just building out with the suburbs. If we take a zoom out, we expanded everything to the right of this road here. Quite a bit of it was done off camera though, but I like how it turned out. And off camera I also expanded down a suburb into this area. I actually did this at the end of recording the last episode, but decided not to include that one in that episode since it was quite long and focused heavily on the park. If we take a wider zoom out of the city, we actually have done quite a bit of expansion with that. And now we're going to move over to this area where my cursor is now, and that's going to be where we're going to locate the city hospital. So off camera I set up all these different buildings here of various hospital buildings to try and figure out what buildings I actually want to use. Personally, I think this building is just too tall for what I'm looking for, so I'm just going to instantly get rid of that one. I think there are a couple of others. I think it was this building over here. It has Korean or something on it, so I'd prefer not to hassle with that. It's probably a little bit too tall for what I want to, so we're gonna get rid of that one. This is a small pediatric hospital. I don't remember who it's by, but I think I am gonna use this one in the hospital complex. So if we just copy it over and put it roughly in the area, we can sort out all the rest of the details later. As well, we probably do want an incinerator for the hospital just as a backup power supply. So I'm going to use this one from the CHS hospital pack made by Chico MX and Blue Thunder. And then we're also going to take a look at some of these other buildings. And so here we've selected out a couple of buildings. Most of them are actually from the CHS hospital pack, which I just ended up preferring the variety that these buildings gave. So you've got like a modern building there, some other few smaller buildings, this main hospital wing, the incinerator, and I also picked out a very simple modernist looking building here that can be used for an older hospital wing. Plus we might add in some other hospital buildings if there's space. And now we're over into the time-lapse, and I also picked out this curved building, which is the Starship Hospital building from Auckland City Hospital in New Zealand, and comes in the CHS Hospital pack. And so does this building too, but I think I'd already picked this out earlier, and so does this third building, so we're actually using quite a lot of buildings from Auckland City Hospital that were included in the CHS Hospital pack. And I also wanted a variety of architectural styles to sort of demonstrate how the hospital might have been developed over some period of time. And then we're moving over to working on changing the signage on this other hospital building, and for now this one is going to be like the radiology and cancer center, and just replacing some Russian text that was on that building beforehand since that wouldn't fit with the city, and just tweaking that signage there. And then coming back and adding in these power plants. I think in the game they actually work as like crematoriums, but they're meant to be the backup power supply for the hospital in case there is a power failure in the general grid. And then here we're starting to add in some surface parking lots. This is just a small one in this little space here between the different parts of this building. I did spend like quite a bit of time trying to figure out all the layout of this. As you see there, I just deleted some other section of parking area because I didn't want it there anymore, and changed the orientation of this building to face in a different direction. And here we're adding in this sort of footbridge area between the two hospital buildings to connect them internally without people having to go across the road to move patients between the different buildings of the hospital. And since the width and the size of this didn't quite fit, I needed to come around and adjust some things manually, and also just change that little window thing there. And then here we're coming through and doing some custom detailing on one of the access roads into the hospital. This one runs under that bridge in between the two hospital buildings. And here is going quite detailed and adding custom guttering or custom channel to the roads using a curbing network set to like the road level, and also adding in a bunch of other line markings too based on the like New Zealand standard road markings. And then in this area here we're also coming through and adding in some retaining walls, as there's a little bit of height difference here, and I found that this was the best way to overcome this. And then we're also adding in some grassed areas between the footpath and this retaining wall, and then that'll be filled with vegetation and things. Off camera, I also upgraded the intersection with the main road to be a signalized intersection, and went around and plopped down the tactile paving and things. I'm not showing that on camera since it was quite a repetitive process of lining up all the tiles, and since I'm a transport engineer in real life, I had to ensure that it was done accurately and met all the standards and things that go on in real life when you're designing those things. And here, adding some trees down alongside the main road. This is quite a wide corridor. I think originally the road was 32 meters wide with the standard avenue, and I changed that to be this custom 5-lane road that I think I made in Road Builder. And there was a bit of extra space on the side beside the footpath, so yeah, just adding the trees in there. And then in this little corner space, we're now going through and adding a little fenced off area. In the real life Starship Hospital, there is actually a small outdoor area here, so I decided to copy that idea. I was kind of looking around on Google Maps trying to find, you know, what can I do with this awkward little corner. So yeah, going through here and just adding a couple of playground equipment things there. And then we're coming through and extending the access road out to connect with the other road that comes off the other like external main road. So now vehicles can drive through this area, but I don't know whether they actually would prefer this route, driving straight through versus just using the other network of main roads. Yeah, and here continuing along and extending out further, lots of road markings and things in this episode since I was trying to get really detailed with everything looking nice, and also using like custom texturing on the road surface itself just to make it look a bit different from the other roads in the area. Although if you do that too many times, I guess it ends up looking just as repetitive as the vanilla, or not vanilla, but the road textures from the other road networks and things. And yeah, coming through, extending that out. This section is changing to be an area with some parallel parking spaces rather than just narrow roads. I figured that on the main entrance area it should just be narrow roads since there's that intersection there, and you wouldn't really want cars stopping in the areas where the ambulances need to get through. Although to be fair, the parking could be better if it's not getting used for cars to pull over. And then we are moving on to this next little awkward corner area between roads and buildings, and for this one I decided that this area is going to be like the main sort of service loading dock area for the entire hospital. So made these retaining walls and then made it ramp down into that area, since again there's a little bit of height differences that needed to be overcome. And also adding in this custom wall network just to make a little planter area alongside the footpath in this spot, since there is a little bit of space. And I think with the amount of concreted areas that are going to end up being in this hospital, it was a good idea to try and find spots to add green space, since it's otherwise just a big piece of concrete. And then after working on these planter areas, we also go through in just a moment and add some additional seating benches and things around that main corner to the top right of the screen. And this is just to provide a place for people to, I don't know, go out and have their lunch or something, since the hospital precinct would be quite a big employment area, I guess, with all the doctors and nurses and admin people and everything else. So yeah, just going through here, adding these planters, a few benches, a couple of trees for shade, and then coming through and finishing off this dock area, adding a few containers, more so just to fill the space than I don't know why you would want to have containers down there, maybe for storage. Then adding some decals to try and break up the surfacing, and a van to try and communicate that this area is used for deliveries. And so before we jump into the next section of time-lapse, I thought I'd just do a quick overview of some of the hospitals that I was referencing for the layout and things of this hospital. The first one is Auckland City Hospital in Auckland, New Zealand. And this is where a lot of those buildings came from, as I discussed before, and was referencing this quite a bit in terms of the building layout and things. The next hospital, also in Auckland City, was Middlemore Hospital, probably looking at this one a little bit less, since it's a bit less dense in terms of the buildings and things. And another one or two is the Wellington City Hospital in Wellington. This is quite a major hospital for everywhere in the Lower North Island, and probably has a catchment of like over 500,000 people in terms of being the largest hospital in that part of New Zealand. And another one is Christchurch Hospital in Christchurch near the CBD. This one probably referencing more so with its fact that it's located near a park, which this one in Hunterville is, with the park being just across the road. And that's also quite a large hospital with a variety of buildings. And then another few honourable mentions is the hospital in Dunedin, New Zealand, Palmerston North, New Zealand, and to a lesser extent maybe the hospital in Hamilton as well. And I was just looking at all these, trying to understand like all the different layouts, how they deal with like providing parking and things. Some had parking buildings, some of the smaller kind of less land constrained ones had surface level parking, and just trying to understand how like everything mashes together, because there's always a lot going on and buildings are getting replaced and taken down and put up and everything else. And I should probably also mention that New Zealand has like a universal healthcare system, so a lot of the hospitals that I'm referencing are public hospitals, but separately New Zealand also has some private hospitals as well. And what we've been working on screen is adding in this building and adjusting some of the road layout to accommodate this building. I imagine that other than serving entry and exit to the emergency department where ambulances need to get through relatively quickly, the other roads in this hospital complex kind of just have formed around the buildings over time, and as the layouts change, they've kind of been shaped by where the buildings are put. And now we're moving on to building an old hospital wing. I don't exactly remember what these buildings are, but they're just some two-story like apartment buildings, and using them to turn into a hospital wing. I think potentially part of this building could have been demolished a little bit, like some additional wing might have been removed to make way for the access roads and things at some point when the newer hospital buildings were built. But this one is a relic from the past, and perhaps is now used for like less urgent things, but where people have to stay at the hospital for a long period of time or something. So like sort of ongoing care, and here it's coming through and filling in the space between the two hospital wings, and then moving over to start finalizing some of the areas between all the different road layouts, as now we have most of the hospital area layout completed, so can start doing some more comprehensive detailing around these areas. And that includes adding in some staircases between these areas. Being a hospital, and although we need to consider the provisions for people in wheelchairs and people that can't use stairs conveniently for whatever reasons. And in most instances in this area, that's going to be catered for by the footpaths on the roads themselves and the intersections of those various roads, allowing for slightly longer connections, but more ramped walkways rather than using these staircases, and these staircases just being a shortcut. And here we're coming through, adding through some trees and things to fill up that space. And then here it ends up being quite a significant height difference, since this building is aligned to the road on the other side, and the hospital building on the other side of this road is aligned to the height of the main road. So we're ending up with a little bit of changes that need to be overcome, and coming through with these tiny bushes and then these regular bushes, and just creating like this vegetated area on the side of the hill. There wouldn't really be any other use for it unless you just kept it as blank grass, which could be an alternative option. And then as we continue around this building, I decided that the staircase in that location there was probably not preferential, as I wanted another way down between these buildings. So now coming along and using procedural objects and just slightly angling these ploppable surfaces to eventually come through and create a ramp down the side of this older hospital wing. And here using the clipping network or clipping blocks to remove the terrain just so I could see what I was doing while I was working out how to create this ramp. And then I bring that all the way down to the footpath at the bottom of the screen now, and managed to connect that up, but kind of skipping through some of the more technical parts of this build since they're a little bit too sort of repetitive and sort of trying to figure out trial and error, a couple of attempts to get things quite right. So yeah, just coming through with a retaining wall on the other side of this, and then that's going to align up with the terrain heights. And then instead of actually connecting these networks, I just made the ends overlap so that it connects in nicely at the different height levels. And then moving over to building a small car parking space in the available space we have on the other side of the older hospital wing. And again, since this is overcoming some height differences, we have a retaining wall. Here I'm using like a stone block one, whereas in the other one I was just using the standard concrete retaining wall, which I have used quite often throughout the city. And yeah, here just coming through using these raisable parking lot spaces, since they are functional and you actually can have them raised up on ploppable surfaces. And then just coming through and putting a few bollards between the walkway and the car park area, since that walkway is quite large, and just to stop people from driving through there where they shouldn't, and also bollards on the front of the car park. And then here I built this hill off camera, underlying its actual like terraformed land, but there's also a lot of ploppable grass surfaces there, which I haven't included in the time lapse because it was very fiddly, but just came through there and put in the trees. And then we're moving over to this corner in between the hospital wings and added a few tables and chairs and a small like coffee kiosk or something. And then something I don't usually do in my builds very often, but I remembered to this time, is to come through and check all the lighting provisions and things, as there were basically no street lights in this build, so came through and did that by hand. And then we're moving over to filling in one of the final empty spaces in the main core of the hospital complex. And this one, just simply another surface parking lot, since there's not really much else this shaped space can be used for other than parking really. So this is right in front of that building that I was working on earlier that I added the cancer centre sign too, and also added some mobility parking spaces out the front, as that makes sense in a hospital situation. Plus there are, in New Zealand, there are minimum requirements for that type of thing as well. And here, just coming through, making a little staircase down to address the height differences. People can also use the roading connections to ramp down to that area if they can't use the staircase. And then in this location, I tried putting in an office building here, but didn't end up really liking that idea. Here you can see me coming through using this office building and then a procedural objects copy of it to make it taller. But that idea ended up not sticking, and I think in a second I come through and remove it just here. And the next solution is more surface level parking, since there's space. And I mean, they probably could squeeze like a few utility buildings in here or something if they really needed to. But we sort of already have that service drop-off loading zone space already, so just coming through and adding this parking lot here. And then we'll move over to try to align all the different height levels here. So here using these slope networks to try and just slope the ground down a little bit. There's not much height difference here, so it's not really enough for a retaining wall, I didn't think. Also there's an area off to sort of the top left of the screen out of the frame, or the camera angle shifted now. But anyway, there's this empty area in around this part that I haven't done anything with yet. I do want to put a multi-story car parking garage there, but I want to do that by hand, and I was honestly just out of motivation to include that in this episode, so that will come at a later date. We'll come through and finish off the area with some signage and other things and try and build out the area a bit more. But we do have a little bit left to go for this episode, and also just finishing up the connections through this car park and adding some bushes and other vegetation around this empty area. Just a few small bushes, nothing too tall. Now we're into the final section of this episode, and we're starting off by working on this corner area between one of the hospital buildings, the main road, and one of the hospital access roads. And here just putting down a retaining wall, and then there'll be a little bit of space left over that we're gonna concrete. And then for now I've just left that empty, but perhaps it could be used for some sort of cafe seating or some other sort of outdoor area. But for now, just putting these stain decals down and leaving it at that. And then moving over to this area where we're also building a staircase down into that larger outdoor area that doesn't really fit with the shape of the building and the existing road layout. And I did go through this wider corridor and upgrade some of the intersections on that road off to the side of this area, and upgraded the 1 or 2 access roads from the hospital to be signalized intersections. And where I've done that, I've also upgraded the road to have 3 lanes in total, so 2 on approach, 1 for the right turning lanes, so they can run separately, but I need to set that up in TMPE if that's to work. And still just working on this area, just finishing off a final few tweaks on this wall. I guess I was trying to get it lined up perfectly. And then in this little blank area in a second we'll come through and add in some planters and trees just to fill up the space. And once we're done that, we'll move over to the last area of this episode, which is near to the backup power supply coal plants. And if you're enjoying this episode, don't forget to leave a like on the video and comment your thoughts on the layout of the hospital. I know it seems a bit all over the place, but that's kind of my thinking of how it would be laid out to reflect how it might have changed over time. And then we're just going to build a car park in this area since it kind of doesn't really connect very well with the rest of the hospital area. It didn't really make any more sense to have other buildings here. Plus, if you think about where the hospital might expand next, they might have wanted to leave this area blank so that when the time comes to build something new, they can operate the existing hospital wards and everything while constructing something new in this area. But that is just a thought about what might happen in the future. And now we've got the general parking layout done. I just used the sort of triangular layout there based on the existing space that I had, and then put in a few little bushes and things around the place to fill up the empty space. And here, I mean, this whole site has really just been dealing with terrain differences, which is kind of fun, but I feel like it's got a little bit repetitive since I've said it like 10 times in the commentary, or probably more than that. But anyway, they're just another staircase, and then coming through with these slope networks and trying to tidy it up. For some reason in this episode, I was really trying to cover up a lot of the ruining texture around the edge of roads and buildings. So that's partly what I was doing here, is using that slope network to partly cover that up and make it just look like seamless grass, although it isn't really, and was probably a little bit overkill in terms of the time I spent trying to achieve that versus the actual outcome. And then here in those last bits, just going through and adding some vegetation and some final streetlights and things to light up the place. And that's it for this episode, and in the next one I plan to expand out the suburbs a bit further. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.